Welcome to this microwaved version of the Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast.
So past tense paranormal.
My name is Jason Knight, host of the show, and with me, as always, is
Oscar motherfucking Spectre.
producer extraordinaire and podcast co-host. So, Oscar, how is your vacation going? Vacation from the podcast?
Unfortunately, a vacation from the podcast just doesn't feel like one because I don't have a vacation from life. I don't have a vacation from my other fucking podcast. I don't have a vacation from jobs or work.
No. Nope.
People pester me left and right all the time for many reasons. So it's great. That's what I'm trying to say. It's a great vacation.
Very long-winded way to say it's great.
It's totally great. No. Yeah, it's fun complaining time. No, it's great. Obviously, it's good to take serious time, and we've been working.
Yes, we really
have.
But
we're working at a different pace that we're used to. No crunch time, no like fuck whatever, where's that clip, where is that time frame, we have to cut this whole section, I don't have time to research it anymore. None of that's happening, no. At least for a few of them. So yeah, how are you? How are you feeling? I mean, you're the one with the high pressure job over there with the high pressured shit. My pressure is just coffee related. It's not much.
Stressful, very stressful. Work is incredibly busy, but I'm doing well, but not easy. Besides that, just researching for the new episodes. I just put to bed yesterday a month-long script I've been writing. So when we come back, I already have a two-parter ready to go.
Ready to go, guys.
That took so much time, so much research, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. So kind of like what you said, there's really no vacation. We're just not as under the gun as we usually are.
Right.
We're still working. We're still humping.
And did it feel better? Like actually like a different, maybe noticeably better, researching this two-parter, knowing that you're there's no rush to the time and everything. Did it feel better doing it?
Yes, it was more fun to do it.
Awesome.
When it's under the gun like that, then it becomes a chore, and chores aren't fun.
No, chores are usually not fun.
Just ask my kids. So this, I was able to take my time, get into it, really involve myself in the research, and it stayed fun. Nice. So it's nice not to be under the gun. It was a good idea to take the break.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what you been up to besides fucking work?
Man, I wish I could say something super cool, like something crazy happened.
Right.
I literally have nothing. I'm a loser right now.
Dude, I feel the same.
Right?
I feel the same. Right now, I've been under a crunch time with the other show, which I'll just say one thing right now real quick. I have another movie-centered podcast called Another Movie Podcast. Check it out at iTunes or whatever. Another Movie Podcast. And we're doing our top 10 TV shows right now. So it's a very busy time. This is the busiest time for me. January, which is typically most people's less busiest time of the year, it's my most. So like we just recorded the top 10 movies of the year, and then tomorrow of this recording, mind you, we're doing a top 10 TV.
Wow.
And next week, early or mid next week, maybe late next week, the latest, we have to do the top 10 discoveries, and all that's got to be done. And once it's done and edited, which is editing top 10 shows is different. It's a different beast a little bit. But once all that's done and it's on the website and it's updated and all that stuff, we're going to take also a break. I suggested it too as a thing.
Oh.
So we're going to come back in March, for example, after all that. Because, movies in the new year, movies tend to need to settle in a bit too, before we get really, really juicy movies to review. So it works both ways. So, yeah, I suggested it to my co-host. And they're like, fuck yeah, let's take a break. We just got to get through this hump.
Got to get through it. Push through.
It's push through this, especially this weekend, particularly a lot of recordings this weekend. But once a week or two passes, I'm going to be much more in the clear. I can breathe. I can play a game. I can actually do something. But yeah, that's how it's been. I don't have anything super interesting to report.
I know. God. So your other podcast is Another Movie Podcast.
Mm-hmm.
They can find it on all the podcast catchers. You're talking about top 10 TV shows. Could you give us a few of your top 10?
Of TV shows specifically.
TV shows, yes.
Well, I haven't made the list yet. I have to actually finalize the list, but I do have. Hold on, I have a whole notes thing here. Let me think. What would make the list? In no particular order, I'm just going to give you my absolute favorites. And I've only seen about 25 shows,
Oh,
25
wow.
seasons, which is a lot to a lot of people, but not that much for a lot of others. It's been a slow year. Pandemic really fucked me over on a lot of stuff. Honestly, I'm watching a lot of things, even though you think it wouldn't have, but it did. It did for me. I just got so less motivated to watch new things. So anyway, the shows that'll make it, I think, make my top 10, give or take, would be The Expanse.
I want to see that.
Yeah. Devs, Kingdom.
Devs was good.
Yeah. Kingdom, I'll Be Gone in the Dark, which we mentioned on this show.
Yes.
The Plot Against America. The Last Dance.
Ooh,
I really like The Boys. Raised by Wolves.
that was good.
Fargo. The Mandalorian. These are some of my favorites. Lovecraft Country. There are others that are like also really good. I don't know where they're gonna fit in yet. Like Westworld maybe. But yeah, those are generally my favorites of the year.
Some really good shows on that list.
I would say so. Yeah, they're a lot of fun. Not a lot of bad ones. That's my point. So a lot of really good ones. So I guess I have an overall pretty solid taste into what I want to watch. But there's a lot I missed. A lot of TV shows I missed. So
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned Westworld, right?
Mhm.
I wanted to like it so bad.
I know. We talked about it before.
Yes, and every time I turned it on, I fall asleep. I have never made it through a single episode. So that kind of gave me, I'm like, oh, this isn't for me, apparently.
No, yeah, that's funny. It's funny that you liked, you really got into devs, considering that
Yeah.
Westworld and devs have very similar pacing with their sci-fi. And if anything, Westworld is probably more eye-catching and more conceptually interesting because devs is more of a mystery. And it's just surprising to me that you were so into devs, but Westworld, which has a lot more like trying to appeal to you, like in its sci-fi-ness, did not appeal to you
At all.
I guess it depends on where you are in your life at the time. That's all it really is.
I think what did it for me was the Wild West theme or the Wild West.
Oh, that's right. You're notoriously dislike Westerns.
I do. It just killed it for me.
I've tried, guys. I've tried showing him Unforgiven. I tried showing him, Outlaw Josie Wales. I've tried showing Jay a lot of really cool, like creme de la creme Westerns. And nothing works.
Can't do it.
Nothing
I don't know
works.
what it is.
Not even Tombstone. Did you watch Tombstone?
No.
Kurt Russell?
No.
Oh, fuck, man.
Was never interested. Does that make me un-American?
It makes you less American, I would say. I don't know if it makes you un-American, but it makes you less American.
Yeah.
But Western, I mean, I love me some Westerns, so I'm fine. I'm more American than you, bitch. That's what I'm saying.
What about? I didn't hear Cobra Kai on that list.
I haven't seen Cobra Kai. I haven't seen. I never finished the first season, much less the second season. Obviously, much less the third season. So
it is so good and fun. Oh,
everyone's
my God!
Everyone binge watches the shit out of it too. Everyone finishes it the day it's released.
That's what we did. That's
exactly
what
everyone did. You and everyone. A lot of people did that. And I'm like, man, Jesus Christ, what does Cobra Kai have?
I don't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's simply nostalgia. I don't know if it's just great writing and great acting. I don't know what it is, but we could not stop. We could not stop.
Yeah.
And now we hate ourselves.
Yeah, now you all hate yourselves because you have to wait a long ass time.
Exactly.
You should have paced yourselves on this treat. You ate the entire cake,
dude.
As soon as it was out of the oven, you barely had a chance to even put any frosting on it, and you just demolish it. You have to wait for the next cake, and it's gonna be God knows when, bro. But yeah, no, my friend Luke said it really nicely where it was the day after it was released. He watched the entire thing, and he's like, so when is season 4 coming out?
Exactly.
He said something like that. And it was really funny and pathetic because I'm like, there's a lot of shows. Go watch something else and wait for season 4. Just wait. But they clearly should be making the entire show in one sitting so they can just release everything to everyone.
Might as well.
Right. Might as well. But yeah, other than that, man, it's not been much out there. So this might be the best segue time to get into our contact info.
Our contact info, right? I haven't said it in so long. I don't even know if I remember.
Do we still say it for the reheat? Yeah, we still say it.
I think the last one I skipped, but I should probably put it in there. You're right.
Right? Okay.
The easiest way to contact the Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast is by visiting our website, chicagoghostpodcast.com. From chicagoghostpodcast.com, you can get to all of our social platforms. That's YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, Patreon.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Oscar, did you know that we're on Patreon?
I knew that. Yes. I mean,
Okay.
yes.
It's been a while.
I don't know much about our show, Jay, and especially our website, but I know about that.
Yes, if you go to patreon.com/supernatural occurrence studies podcast, or just click the Patreon link in this episode show notes, you could support the podcast and get Patreon only podcast episodes for just $5 a month. That's all it takes.
That's right.
During this break that we're on, the hiatus, we're still rolling fresh content on Patreon. So if you're missing new episodes and you're jonesing for more Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast, join our Patreon. Patreon.com/Supernatural Occurrence Studies podcast. And of course, Oscar, we have that phone number people can call.
They still can.
They
It
want to
still
get a
works.
hold of the show. It
You
does
didn't
work.
You didn't cancel it
I didn't.
or like put it on hold for our hiatus?
Did not.
You couldn't at least do that for me? Like,
I know. I thought about it. I'm like, this is the least I could do for Oscar is get rid of his phone number.
Right. This obtrusive, annoying, like wants to be part of the club, but we don't want him. He's kind of a pipsqueak kind of fucking phone number and following us and shit. I don't want it. But say it anyway, I guess.
I'll say the pipsqueak phone number.
Mm-hmm.
872-529-0767. That's 872-529-0767, a Chicago area code 872.
It's more like a Chicago suburb area code. It's like, I think the suburb that no one knows about that's next to Arlington Heights or something. That's not like a real place.
Inverness or something.
It's not in the city, right? It's not in the city. It's around the city.
Call the number, leave us a message, send us a text. We will read them and play them on the show. We love to hear from our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
So, Oscar, tonight we are reheating a really cool episode that you chose, by the way. I kind of forgot about this one.
Yeah, me too.
It's episode 84, The Laurel Canyon Conspiracy, originally released January 20th, 2019. So a long time ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow, that's
almost
2 years ago.
Almost to the date.
Almost to the day, 2 years ago. So very kismet that I picked this one. Again, very randomly. I didn't know which to pick. It was hard for me to pick one. It was hard to pick a favorite. You know, the last one we picked was the Vixens, right? Desert Vixens. And that's a pure fun one, like pure capital P, capital F for fun. And this one, it's obviously very fun. It's very fascinating, capital F, fascinating story and theory and conspiracy. And, you'll get to hear it in a bit, guys. Obviously, you're about to understand everything. In case you don't remember or maybe you've never heard it. You're about to find out. I'm not going to spoil it for you. But I will say that what appealed to me to pick this one is that the first thing that struck me about Laurel Canyon Conspiracy is that it was such a big conspiracy, or at least a bigger one than I thought it would be, that I'd never heard of. And the fact that, it's not like I'm savant on information or conspiracy or anything, but like I feel like some of it I would have heard of at some point in my life before, we did that show 2 years ago. But I never heard of it, and it was such a fascinating new / big thing I never heard about. So that intrigued the fuck out of me. And then the other one is the actual conspiracy itself, the idea of all these, the hippie culture coming in through this music and the music changing and them being, the relation they have to government and federal government and military government, and how they themselves were doing very weird stuff with government projects, right? You think of Wormwood, right? Or you think of other things like that, that sprang from that decade or the decade before. Yeah. And it's all fishy. And obviously it's just a conspiracy theory because Not because we can't. I mean, we can't prove it. That's the problem. We cannot prove it, but it's just weird enough where it could be true, or parts of it could definitely be true. We just won't know because of classified stuff, So it's really interesting, and it's a fun conspiracy.
It really is, and I agree. It's one of those. It's a big one that you don't hear of, or at least you don't think about. But these rumors are out there, and
Right.
first of all, I love that time period of music, the 1960s to about the mid 70s. Jim Morrison, The Doors, Mamas and the Papas, Frank Zappa,
Right.
America, Crosby,
Right.
Stills and Nash, The Byrds, James Taylor. Love those guys, but having them all sort of migrate to this one little section of California, seemingly without reason, and then turn into these world sort of changing or culture defining bands out of nowhere, is very strange. And then the fact that all of them have deep military ties within their family, or even though they were hippies, they had blue blood backgrounds and money and power and influence.
Mm-hmm.
Fascinating stuff. So what the theory is that the whole hippie movement, this counterculture, was created by the government to subvert that very same culture because they were protesting the war, right?
Yeah.
So discredit the whole movement by bringing in this dirty hippie culture, and with it the music and the scene and the style and the drugs and the sex and the to completely just to um, throw a wrench into that movement
Yeah, and discredit it too.
and discredit it. Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. And not only that, it ties in Charles Manson. It ties in secret government programs, MK Ultra,
Right.
UFOs, the Battle of Los Angeles. I mean, all this stuff plays into this Laurel Canyon conspiracy,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just fantastic researching. I think we could do a part 2 and a part 3 if we ever really wanted to. There's just so much there.
Yeah.
And with it, there's some Hollywood tie-ins as well. Classic Hollywood figures, the Young Turks, Jack Nicholson. Very,
That's
very
right. Yeah.
fascinating stuff. We'll have links in the show notes, of course, the original links from the original episode. Jim Morrison's ghost. I think we have a picture of Jim Morrison's actual ghost that listeners could see. How fucking cool, man.
Yeah.
So,
And as a trip of a show. Yeah.
yeah. So I'm glad you chose this one. We get a lot of good feedback on this episode, whether it's email, YouTube, especially on YouTube. People really like this episode. So
Yeah, a lot in the comment sections. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we did good on this one, Oscar. Good choice on choosing it. I can't wait to re-listen to it. I think we're going to remove the commercials from this reheated episode for your listening pleasure.
Of course.
And if you have any final words.
No, man. Just enjoy it. Keep the open mind, of course, and ready up your Googles so you can, go along with the research of all the names we drop in that episode.
Yes.
It's a good rule of thumb. I imagine some of our listeners already must be doing that, but those of you who have not thought of it or maybe haven't done that yet, I'll remind you to do so. For especially conspiracy stuff, it's fun to, Google along.
Yeah. Good call.
Check it out. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, listeners, with that, here is the reheated episode 84, The Laurel Canyon Conspiracy. Welcome back, listeners. Thank you for hearing from our sponsor. Follow the directions in the commercial and support. I don't know what.
I'm sorry. Is. It's so clear that Jay doesn't know which commercial I use.
Exactly. I have no idea.
I'm sorry. It was so blatantly clear.
Keep rolling, listeners. Check it out. Support us.
Next time, just say "Hey guys, make sure you follow that link, and you'll get all hooked up."
There you go. There you go. All right. So, the lights are turned down low.
On my end.
The drinks are flowing. The ceremonial candle is lit. Let's get on with this show.
He means lit the way teenagers say it's lit, not like literally.
Lit as fuck.
Yep.
All right. So I did a lot of research for this episode. From all over the internet, I pulled sources. But a lot of it, the majority of it came from a man named Dave McGowan. Dave McGowan. Listeners, if at the end of this episode you found yourself wanting even more, do yourself a favor and look him up, because he's great. His research is great on this topic. So tonight we're taking a time machine and going back to look at the time period covering the early 1960s to about 1975. We're going to be talking about Laurel Canyon, the influential bands that formed there, and the anti-war and hippie countercultures.
So not the movie from the 90s?
Not the movie from that's right, there was a movie. That's right.
Starring Kate Beckinsale, if my memory serves.
That's right. I'm going to have to, now after doing all this, I'm going to watch it.
Oh no, don't watch it. It has nothing to do with that.
Oh, well, scratch that from the record.
It's like a love story. I was just making fun of it.
Oh, gotcha. No, this is definitely not a love story.
No.
So talking about Laurel Canyon and the influential bands that formed there and the anti-war and hippie countercultures, the Flower Children and their music. Now I know what you're probably thinking. What the fuck does this have to do with the paranormal? Although I do promise you one ghost story by the end of the show. This episode is all about conspiracy. And man, is it strange. All right. So first, let's talk a little bit about the location where all of this takes place. A beautiful little slice of heaven called Laurel Canyon. Now, Laurel Canyon is a mountainous neighborhood. It's a canyon located in the Hollywood Hills region of the Santa Monica Mountains, in the West Hollywood Hills district of Los Angeles, California. In the past, a native tribe called the Tongva held this land until they were decimated by the Spanish and later the American settlers. There's a lot of history here. The soil on top of which our story takes place, it's estimated to be 12 million to 200 million years old, and is a mixture of ocean sediment, volcanic debris, and compressed rock. Temperature in Laurel Canyon ranges between 64 and 84 degrees in midsummer. Coyotes, mountain lions, and bobcats run through the canyon, while owls, falcons, golden eagles, and green parrots fly overhead. Flora, like chaparral, sage scrub, wild willows, black cottonwood, and white elder, coat the canyon landscape. And homes here are beautiful, and they're historic, and they're in the millions of dollars. It sounds like paradise. For over 100 years, Laurel Canyon and the surrounding area was ground zero for countercultures, even before the hippies and the anti-war guys and all the free-loving folk, before the flower power, psychedelic drugs, and of course, the fantastic music. Hollywood was founded by Harvey Wilcox. Wilcox was successful at real estate in Topeka, Kansas. After leaving his wife for a girl 30 years his junior, Wilcox and his wife, Ida, left Topeka and bought a ranch in Los Angeles. His wife, Ida, a pagan and a rumored witch, named the area Hollywood. Later, Manly P. Hall, famous lecturer, mystic, and author who wrote The Secret Teachings of All Ages, an encyclopedia outline of Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian symbolic philosophy, would move to the Los Angeles area and begin his lectures on ancient wisdoms and pagan beliefs. Throughout much of its history, the Los Angeles area would be a hotbed of cults and religious movements. This would culminate into something before unseen in Laurel Canyon and likely the world, which would in turn spread to mainstream America and the world and shape the attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs of a generation. Because, baby, some of the best music ever created came out of Laurel Canyon during this time. You with me so far, Oscar?
Oh, were you talking this entire time?
I was.
Is it a misconnection? Sorry, no, I hear you.
Okay. One thing I didn't mention, I just want to pause here. One of my best friends, Brian C., we'll call him. You know him, hopefully. He lives in Sioux City, Iowa. He's one of my brothers, just like you guys in SOS. He helped me put together this episode as well. So I forgot to mention that in the beginning, and I wanted to mention that now. So thank you, Brian. Love you, brother. Hope you liked this episode and the way I pulled your notes together. So anyway.
Yeah, cite your sources, bitch.
I know, right? So that's a bit about Laurel Canyon, where it's located, where it is in California, some of its history. It goes back far, and a lot of its history is seeped in, this sort of mystic, culty sort of aura. Okay.
Yes.
Which I think plays a big part in tonight's topic. So, from the early 1960s to about 1975, all the people who would become megastars in the anti-war movement and the hippie movement flocked to, of all places, Laurel Canyon in California, which, when looking back, was really strange because back then, California was not the epicenter of the music industry like it is today. Back then, places like Nashville, New York, and Detroit, they were where it was at musically, not some relatively desolate canyon in California. It's almost like these guys and girls, these bands, these figures in the counterculture, it's like they were called to Laurel Canyon by someone or something else. To quote Neil Young, who found fame at Laurel Canyon, and who also found himself, like so many others in the 1960s and 70s, heading to Los Angeles and Laurel Canyon for no apparent reason. According to Neil Young, quote, "We were just going like lemmings," end quote. They didn't know why. They just knew they had to go. And these bands that formed in Laurel Canyon, the bands that would become world famous, they weren't organically grown. You got to understand this. These guys didn't have the same musical interests. A lot of them actually had no musical talent to speak of. They didn't hang out together or travel together. They didn't even grow up together, most of them. A lot of them couldn't even play their instruments, yet they became mega. It's like they were cast into the roles they would later hold. And here's the real kicker. Almost all the bands that came out of Laurel Canyon, the ones singing about peace and love your brother, make love, not war, those guys, all of them had military intelligence, high-ranking military involvement, and political ties in their family backgrounds. Actually, a lot of them had what one would consider blue blood lineages, meaning coming from immense wealth and prestige. These hippie anti-war guys.
Can you imagine being the one hippie that didn't come from that background? he doesn't get invited to lunch as often as the rest.
At all,
right, it's like school. Okay, that's all I want to say.
No, that's funny because that would be the odd man out in this group of people. That's how prevalent it was.
Yeah, that's so strange, but it kind of makes sense though. Just as far as you've gone so far in this story, as far as background goes, it kind of makes sense. When you think about people who are kids who are brought up in highly religious families or structures, right? And they kind of like rebel against it and they do everything in their power, right?
Yes.
It's kind of like the same frame, right? It's the same reaction.
It is, and that's an extremely valid point. That's the point I was thinking about as I was putting this together. I'm like, well, no, this is just teenagers being, teenagers just rebelling.
Right.
I think I have a counterpoint to that, but it's in my close, so I'm going to save it till then. But that's good.
How dare you?
Think about that. That's good. So to understand the hippie movement, it wasn't always here, listeners, young listeners. There weren't always hippies. They came from somewhere, from a certain place in a certain time. And to understand the hippies, we have to understand a guy named Vito Pellicas. Vito Pellicas, a hippie pimp, a really strange cat. Now, Vito is credited as being the guy that created the ideas, the hairstyles, the dress, the attitudes, that became the hippie movement. The hippie movement didn't start on Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco like so many people claim. It actually started in LA with Vito, the hippie pimp. Now, understand that the hippie movement wasn't yet in existence when these Laurel Canyon bands begin to form. Yet suddenly these bands are getting signed, even though most didn't know how to play. They're being given brand new equipment and instruments. They're being given studio time. Radio stations in LA were created to play their music. And while all this is happening, nightclubs like London Fog, The Ambassador, Whiskey A Go-Go, and a bunch of others started popping up all over Sunset Strip, specifically to support these bands out of Laurel Canyon that no one's ever heard of, that didn't really have any musical talent, by giving them a place to play. It's like someone in the know knew what was to come. So Vito Polikas, who, by the way, was related by marriage to the Rockefellers, Vito and his crazy dance troupe, made up of mostly underage girls and runaways called the Freakers, and Vito's sidekick, Carl Franzoni, known affectionately as Captain Fuck, they were used, these guys, Vito, the Freakers, and Captain Fuck, they were used to lure people into these new Sunset Strip clubs, which had zero base clientele at the time, and make customers listen to bands no one heard of and that really kind of sucked. Think of the club kids from the 90s in New York. Have these crazy-ass people dressing like chickens and angels and intermixed drag queens and all sorts of weird shit, and suddenly customers would flock to the clubs to catch a glimpse of the insane. Same with Vito. People would flock to the new LA clubs to see Vito and his Freakers. This ploy also helped hide the fact that the bands playing up on stage at these clubs, these newly formed Laurel Canyon bands, they weren't good. Certainly not as good as the radio made them sound. But the more the people came to see the Freakers, the more acclimated they became to the bands. It was like a covert indoctrination. Now, even though Vito was credited as starting the hippie movement, he was it's a real strange, mysterious, shadowy character. Rumor has it that Vito and his wife, Zoo, and that's S-Z-O-U, I think I'm saying it right, and his family of followers were Satanists. Vito and Sue's son, Godot, not infant son at this point.
Maybe it's Godot.
Godot, maybe? Oh, you might be right, Godot. You know what? Because I have seen it in different articles spelled with a T and an O. So I bet you Godot is actually pronounced Godot. Good call. So Vito and his wife, their son, Godot, he was supposed to play Lucifer himself in Kenneth Anger's 1974 film, Lucifer Rising. Now, unfortunately, Godot died before he could play Lucifer, at or around age 3 or 5. No one's really sure. And his death, poor Godot's death, is surrounded by mystery as well. Some say Godot died in a freak accident, having fallen through a trap door during a strange photo shoot at Vito's house.
What the fuck?
Others claim Vito fed the poor child immense amounts of acid, which caused the child to freak out and fall through a trapdoor. Many people speculated that the death of Godot was actually a ritual sacrifice to Satan. Possibly even more shocking is that immediately after the child's death, Vito and his wife went out to a nightclub to drink, get fucked up, and dance. And they acted aloof, like the child never even existed. Poor Godot. Now, later on, after the child's death, rumors circulated that Vito would pass his own son, Godot, around to his friends, both male and female, and his friends would pleasure the little boy with their mouths to, as Vito put it, introduce Godot to sensuality. This is the people that gave us hippies, okay? It's fucked up.
I mean, related to the Rockefellers, right?
Related to the Rockefellers by marriage, exactly.
Which feels like very substantial to the whole, because there is a lot of like truism, right, to Rockefellers. It's their standings with
sure.
the world they created, right, or the world they've helped shaped, right, based on finance
Yeah, they're
and the
supposed to be
property they own and Wall Street.
the power they yield.
Right, they yield a lot of power. They don't, it's like arresting Robert Durst. He's not going to get convicted no matter how many people he kills.
Exactly.
Right, and it feels like this is just a gigantic way to get innocent people so they can fuck them. It's like everything's about sex with these Satanists. It's like,
Yes,
or
not
these
even
people.
with these high-powered people. Exactly.
Right, it's like, it's always, I mean, I get it. Sex is great, but like, they go through such lengths. They'll start the hippie movement just so they can get like young girls off the bus, attract them with this weird club and people who don't know how to play music. Right, it just feels so weird and shady.
Yeah, and don't forget the Rockefellers. They're supposedly, tied into the deep state, the Illuminati.
Right.
All this comes together. So that's a great point. Now, besides Vito and his troupe of freakers luring customers into the new Sunset Strip bars and clubs, you also had the Young Turks drawing people in as well. The Young Turks. These were the new hotness in Hollywood back in the day. Groovy, rebellious, beautiful, young rising stars. We're talking about people like Jack Nicholson, Warren Beatty, Steve McQueen, Dennis Hopper, Sharon Tate, Marlon Brando, Peter and Jane Fonda, and Bruce Dern. And the Young Turks were very much part of the Laurel Canyon scene and were really close to the musicians there. And these guys, the Young Turks, the rebels of Hollywood back in the day, all have deep familial ties to the government and military. Also blue blood lineage, just like their Laurel Canyon musician friends had deep military ties and blue blood lineages, which we'll see here in a bit. But first, let's take a look at a few of the Young Turks. We got Dennis Hopper, the bad boy, the crazy man back in the day.
Easy Rider himself.
Exactly, thank you. Easy Rider himself. For decades, Dennis Hopper claimed his father was nothing but a simple farmer. But shortly before his death, Hopper admitted that his father was a career intelligence officer and a member of the OSS during World War II, Office of Strategic Services, a predecessor of today's CIA. Wasn't a farmer at all. We got Bruce Dern. Now, I had to look up Bruce Dern. I couldn't remember who he was. Do you know who he is, Oscar?
Oh, yeah, he's from Nebraska. He's done a lot of movies.
Yeah. I recognized him from The Hateful Eight, Tarantino's Hateful Eight. He was General Sandy Smithers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that I had to look him up. But now Bruce Dern, again, another bad boy of Hollywood back in the day. His godparents were First Lady Eleanor Roosevelt and Adlai Stevenson. Stevenson, who was a two-time Democratic nominee for U.S. president.
Yeah, he was a senator.
Yes. And Bruce Dern's grandfather, George Dern, was former Secretary of War under Roosevelt, which today is called the Secretary of Defense. Bruce Dern's uncle, Archibald McLeish, also served under Roosevelt as the director of the War Department's Office of Facts and Figures and as the assistant director of the Office of War Information. Good old Archibald was also a skull and bonesman over at Yale, class of 1915. Jane and Peter Fonda's father, Hank Fonda, was a decorated U.S. Navy intelligence officer during World War II.
What was he decorated with? Like ornaments? Like Christmas ornaments?
Nah, man, whipped cream.
Oh, nice. Very nice. Cool.
Now, Hank Fonda's third wife was Italian Countess Affedera Franchetti, who was rumored to have had an affair with newly sworn-in U.S. President John F. Kennedy, and whose father was a consultant to fascist dictator Benito Mussolini, and was the great-granddaughter of Louise Sarah Rothschild of the Rothschild banking family. Again, Rothschilds, supposed Illuminati and members of the deep state. As if it can't get any stranger, Fonda's ancestors and David Crosby's ancestors, David Crosby from Crosby, Stills, and Nash, we'll talk about them in a few minutes, They go all the way back to the 1650s, when Fonda's ancestors left the Netherlands on a ship headed to the New World that was co-owned by Crosby's ancestors. And let's not forget Peter Fonda's hippie peace activist sister Jane Fonda, when she, in 1972, during the Vietnam War, posed for a photograph with Vietnamese soldiers on an anti-aircraft gun that would have been used to shoot down American planes. America hated Jane Fonda for this photo. And a lot still hate her to this very day, over 44 years later.
Yeah, I believe that it gave her a really rocky career because of that.
Yeah.
If my memory serves right, because I remember she was like on her way to be a big star, just like Peter. In many ways, to a lot of people, she still is. And that's why it was a big deal when she was in that movie Jackie Brown, I think.
Oh, really?
If I'm not mistaken, yeah.
Huh. Well, you're right. It soiled her career, and she won the name Hanoi Jane. And I'll leave a good old Hanoi Jane. That's Jane Fonda. I'll leave a link to a bunch of the Hanoi Jane photos in the show notes. Now, I'm not gonna joke around. Jane Fonda was hot. She looked good in those military fatigues in these pictures, but it was fucked up what she did. No, people never forgave her for it. Young Turks, right?
Yeah.
Sharon Tate, another young Turk. Sharon Tate, of course, synonymous with the Manson murders. She was the daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tate, a career U.S. Army intelligence officer. Warren Beatty's father, Ira, was a professor of psychology, rumored to be employed by the intelligence department and involved in the real top-secret MKUltra program, which was taking place in part in American universities.
Wait, Tate, that sounds familiar. Who's he? Don't they have an actress in their family?
Sharon Tate.
Is that the one that got killed by the Manson people?
Yes. Okay. We're going to get into that, too.
Okay, cool. I want to make sure I didn't miss it. I was right in my head. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's cool. And I'm not even going to start on Jack Nicholson. Officially...
That guy was up to shit.
Oh, man. We could do a podcast on Jack. Now, officially, Jack, he doesn't have a mother. He doesn't have a father. He doesn't have a birth certificate. From his birth in 1937 up until 1954, he officially didn't exist. Today, he only has a certificate of delayed birth, which was issued by the state of New Jersey in 1954. Jack Nicholson has even been linked to the Manson murders. There's a lot more to Nicholson's story, but as I said, that's for another time. So in essence, Vito Polikas and his freakers, along with the Young Turks, were what put these Laurel Canyon bands on the map. People came out to see the freakers and to possibly rub elbows with the new Hollywood stars, the Young Turks, and as an intended side effect, unbeknownst to the clubgoers, get acclimated to the new Laurel Canyon scene. So let's finally take a look at that Laurel Canyon crew, the Flower Children, those influential people and bands that supposedly helped define a generation in its thoughts, behaviors, and beliefs. And I'd argue that still have echoes of influence today. And let's start with my favorite Laurel Canyonite, Jim Morrison, frontman for the Doors, the legendary rock god, poet, Lizard King himself, who was arguably the biggest star to come out of Laurel Canyon. Now, for listeners who don't know, famous Doors songs, Break On Through, L.A. Woman, Roadhouse Blues, People Are Strange, Crystal Ship, Peace Frog. Oscar, could you think of any?
Not the biggest Morrison fan like you are.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, I just don't know much.
That's okay. No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Peace Frog, if you listen to anything, check out Peace Frog. It's awesome. All right. Now, Jim Morrison's father was U.S. Navy Admiral George Stephen Morrison, who commanded U.S. warships in Vietnam's Tonkin Gulf in August of 1964, when the USS Maddox allegedly came under attack, which led to the immediate passing of the Tonkin Gulf Resolution, which in turn quickly plunged America into the horrible Vietnam War. Over 58,000 American troops were killed in Vietnam. there is much speculation as to whether or not any ships came under attack during the Tonkin Gulf incident. Instead, experts now believe the entire event was fabricated or severely embellished in efforts to fool the American public and push the U.S. into war. So as Admiral George Morrison was helping stage a potentially illegal war that would result in the death of countless U.S. soldiers, his son, Jim, was gearing up to become an icon in the hippie movement. There's even a picture of preppy, clean-cut, almost collegiate-looking Jim Morrison in a sport coat with elbow patches, along with his father, on the bridge of the USS Bonham Richard, one of the ships that was involved in the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And I'll leave a link to that picture in the show notes. It's really cool to see a young Jim Morrison. And what's strange is just a short time after that picture was taken, we had the Jim Morrison we now know and love today. You have to understand, what's weird about this is Jim Morrison was not an ideal candidate to be the rock star lizard king he was to become. He couldn't play an instrument. He wasn't a musician. Didn't really have interest in music and never learned to read or write music. Yet within a year of his father leaving the Gulf of Tonkin, Jim Morrison completely transformed his image into the troubled, addicted, sage before his time star we all know and love him as. And I'm not sure if this is relevant or not, but Jim Morrison died on the same day that his father gave a decommissioning speech involving the ship involved in the Gulf of Tonkin, the USS Maddox, the one that was supposedly under attack, which ultimately led us into Vietnam.
Yeah, that's not in your notes.
Oh, sorry. So he died on the same day his dad decommissioned the ship, and even Morrison's death is surrounded in mystery. Jim Morrison officially died in Paris on July 3rd, 1971, in a bathtub, in an apartment he and his girlfriend, Pamela Corson, shared together. Morrison was only 27 when he died. Now, even though there wasn't an autopsy, officials basically went on what Pam Corson told them. The official death was heart attack brought on by drug use. But the story of Jim Morrison's death has changed over the years. One story Pam gave police had Morrison waking up in the middle of the night, coughing up blood. Then he went to the tub to relax, and that's when he died. Another story has Morrison coming home one night to find his girlfriend Pam sitting next to a table with a bunch of white powder on it. Pam tells Morrison it's cocaine when it's really heroin. Jim snorts it, collapses on the floor. Pam hurriedly gets him into the tub, and that's when he dies. Yet another story has Morrison dying in the bathroom of a Paris nightclub called the Rock and Roll Circus. Then two drug dealers brought his body back to the apartment, and they placed him in the tub as an attempt to revive him. And still other rumors say Morrison never died at all. In these rumors, Morrison didn't die, but changed his look and moved to New York to recite poetry. Or he changed his image and his name and moved to Oregon and opened the Jim Morrison Sanctuary Ranch under his new identity, William Lawyer. Whatever the case, that's Jim Morrison, and we'll see time again this familial military theme throughout the Laurel Canyon crew. But I'll leave you with one more item on Jim Morrison. There is a picture, which has been deemed authentic, of Jim Morrison's ghost standing behind his grave in Paris, wearing dark pants and a white shirt with arms outstretched, just like Morrison would do on stage before going into a twirling fit during instrumental parts of his songs. It's a pretty awesome photo, and of course I'll leave a link to it in the show notes.
Although I would say if you want to hide from the spotlight, like as Jim Morrison was, as big as he was, either folk music or poetry are the two most hidden things you can do. No one will ever notice you if you recite poetry.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah. Well, that's one rumor. Poetry in New York.
Yeah.
So let's move on to another Laurel Canyon night. Famous.
Actually, before we do so, can I say something?
Please.
I want to make a correction on something I said earlier. I mixed up the Fondas, because there's a bunch of Fondas out there. I mixed up Jane Fonda with Bridget Fonda. It was Bridget Fonda who was the night in the movies in the 90s that I thought that was her. It was her daughter.
Oh, gotcha.
So, correction. There you go.
Thank you.
In case so you get the emails like, hey, he's talking about the wrong Fonda.
You guys don't know what you're talking about, man. I'm going to stop listening.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you.
Cool.
Have you ever heard of Frank Zappa?
The doy.
Okay, Frank Zappa, the famous poster where he's sitting on the shitter. Phi Zappa Crappa. Old poster one of my uncles had. But yeah, Frank Zappa. And I'm not a Zappa fan, but I have heard his song Muffin Man, and I like it. It's cool. It's dark. It's heavy. Of course, he's done way more than that. I couldn't tell you what, but check out Muffin Man. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Anyway, Frank Zappa, he was a military kid who spent a lot of his young life on military bases and being educated in military schools. Frank Zappa's father, Francis Zappa, was a chemical warfare engineer, having been stationed at the Inglewood Arsenal, home to America's chemical warfare program, and according to rumor, the Inglewood Arsenal was also deeply involved in the MKUltra program. Later in his career, Francis Zappa worked military intelligence. Go figure.
Yeah, go figure. Also, he looks like a pedophile.
He really does. Creepy looking dude.
He looks completely untrustworthy.
Would you leave your kids home with him for a nice evening on the town with Lexi?
He looks like He looks like the dark version of Weird Al.
Oh yeah, if
like
Weird
the
Al,
dark version's uncle.
Yeah, like if Weird Al did a 15-year prison stint, and came out, he'd look like Frank Zappa.
Yeah.
Now, Frank Zappa himself was seen as the father figure of the Laurel Canyon crowd, having hosted at one time or another almost every would-be anti-war counterculture movement personality in his home in the middle of Laurel Canyon, which was referred to as the Log Cabin. Zappa even hosted Charles Manson and his family at the Log Cabin for quite some time. Frank Zappa is credited with helping give rise to the hippie counterculture, along with Vito and his crew of freakers, even though Zappa himself did not agree with the hippie anti-war ideology and actually supported U.S. military actions in Southeast Asia. Actually, it's said that Frank Zappa held nothing but disdain for the undisciplined lives the hippies promoted. Frank Zappa's manager, his music manager, was a guy named Herb Cohen, a former U.S. Marine with a shady arms smuggling past. And Zappa's wife, Gail, comes from a long line of naval officers. And her father...
Is he related? Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I keep forgetting we're not like seeing each other. The Cohen thing, that reminds me, isn't there like a famous gangster in LA during this time? Or like the generation before?
Mickey Cohen. And yes, I think Herb Cohen was either Mickey Cohen's son. I think it was Mickey Cohen's son.
Yeah, that sounds right. Because I remember seeing something or reading something about the family doing something with music. And I just...
Good point. Yeah, Mickey Cohen, huge gangster in LA back in the day.
Yeah, if you want to watch a good, not a good Mickey Cohen rendition, but a good like tonal like gangster version of it, LA Confidential has like the after effects of Mickey Cohen's rackets. That's pretty cool. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
I heard about the movie for years. I've never seen it.
Oh man, it's so good. You should watch it. It's through the cops angle perspective, but it's like the corruption of cops in LA, as you can imagine, is like really huge. And it's all based on the Mickey Cohen type of mafia. It's like the cops take it for themselves. It's really weird. It's really cool.
Huh.
You should watch it.
I will. Listeners, check it out. I'm going.
It's on Netflix.
Okay, so getting back to Zappa's wife, Gail, she comes from a long line of naval officers. And her father spent his career working on classified nuclear weapons research for the U.S. Navy. And Gail herself at one time worked as a secretary for the Office of Naval Research and Development. Again, this military background. Gail attended kindergarten with Jim Morrison, and Jim Morrison later attended the same high school as John Phillips and Cass Elliot of the Mamas and the Papas. Small world, and they all wind up in Laurel Canyon. Which brings us to the Mamas and the Papas. Songs like California Dreamin', Monday, Monday, and Dream a Little Dream of Me, all from Mamas and the Papas. I love California Dreamin'. It's one of my favorite songs. Okay, so we got Papa John Phillips of the Mamas and the Papas. He was an extremely influential character in the hippie anti-war counterculture that came out of Laurel Canyon. You see, Papa John, along with Terry Melcher, who, among other things, was a record producer, the son of actress Doris Day, and one-time associate of Charles Manson. Now, we're going to get into the Manson family murders here in a bit, but I got to pause here because I mentioned that name, Terry Melcher. So I'm going to digress for a moment, listeners, but I think this is important. Terry Melcher met Charles Manson through a mutual friend, Dennis Wilson, one of the Beach Boys. A lot of people don't realize Manson and the Beach Boys, namely Dennis Wilson, were extremely close. Extremely close. The long and short, Melcher, the record producer, Terry Melcher, told Charles Manson that he was very interested in producing a record for Manson and a documentary about the Manson family. After Manson auditioned for Melcher, Melcher decided Manson wasn't what he was looking for. So the record deal and the documentary was abandoned. Now Manson, already a fucking severely unstable guy, took utmost offense to this dropping of his record and the documentary. So it's said that's what caused Manson to plot to kill Terry Melcher. Now this is important. At the time, Melcher lived at 10050 Celio Drive. Anyone who's up on their Manson history knows that address. That's the address where the Manson murders took place. So Melcher lived there during this time, but supposedly, unbeknownst to Manson, Melcher moved out by the time the Manson murders and Helter Skelter took place. Instead, the home was rented to and occupied by Sharon Tate and her husband, Roman Polanski.
Yep.
The rest, of course, unfortunately, is history. Okay.
Can I give something? Just a bit of background. If you guys are interested, there is this very famous show called You Must Remember This. I don't know if you've heard of it, Jay.
You Must Remember This. Why does that sound familiar?
It's a podcast. Where it's funny enough, the wife of Rian Johnson, the guy who did the last Star Wars movie, is the main person there. She does classic Hollywood stories on the podcast. She did an 8-part series on Manson, and she spends the entire thing on Roman Polanski and the whole Tate thing. So if you want to find out some nice info about it and really well productions with the music and stuff, I would recommend that if you guys want to listen to it.
Awesome. I'm going to check it out because I'm writing a Manson episode. I've been writing it for like 6 months.
Definitely. You have to look it up. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's, like you said, this podcast was 8 parts. There's so much to Charles Manson and the family. And I don't even know what direction to take it.
You know what's funny? My first thought is that after you said that whole thing earlier about how the musicians were bad at music, it didn't matter, that they were good. Yeah. How bad must Manson have been that he wouldn't even be accepted by them?
Dude, I'm going to tell you a story.
Yeah.
I have Charles Manson on my Spotify list.
Yeah.
His song, Look at Your Game Girl, I fucking love it. I think listeners, Oscar, look up Look at Your Game Girl by Charles Manson, listen to it. I think it's fantastic.
Okay.
I feel guilty saying that, but it's great. And
I don't feel guilty. I mean, how many people do we like that did great, stuff? That are terrible people.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah.
But yeah, Look at Your Game Girl. So, and that's kind of in answer to your question, I don't think he was that bad. But as fate would have it, Melcher thought he was bad. So.
Yeah, I mean, that could have been a big difference, right? Maybe he would have been a Harvey Weinstein type instead of a murderer, like, right? I don't know. I mean, none of it's good, but just less bad.
Less bad, right.
Right, yeah.
And poor Sharon Tate. I mean, and I'll mention the names of everybody here later, but
Sharon Tate, like the Helen of Troy of her fucking age.
Oh, my God. I still think, I thought I was going to say Helen of Troy. I still think Sharon Tate is probably one of Hollywood's most beautiful actresses ever. She was stunning.
One of the most gorgeous. Yeah.
Yeah, just stunning. Definitely. Listeners, look up Sharon Tate. Beautiful. Okay, so to get back to the main point here, sorry for the digression, but again, I mentioned Melcher, and there's some important stuff with Melcher. Mm-hmm. So the main point of this particular section, Papa John Phillips and Terry Melcher, they created the famed Monterey Pop Festival. And with unprecedented media coverage of the festival, they thrust that pop music, the Monterey Pop Festival, and its attendees, the hippies, into mainstream America, giving the country its first look into the movement's music, style, and its personalities. Papa John also penned the song San Francisco, Be Sure to Wear Flowers in Your Hair, which quickly rose to the top of the charts. Now, this song, along with the Pop Music Festival, inspired America's disenfranchised youth, a lot of them runaways, to flock to San Francisco, which created the Haight-Ashbury phenomenon and the famed 1967 Summer of Love. That was all Papa John of the Mamas and the Papas, and to a lesser degree, Terry Melcher. Now, Papa John was the son of a U.S. Marine Corps captain, John Edmund Andrew Phillips, and his mother, Papa John's mother, Edna Gertrude, she claimed to have psychic and telekinetic abilities. Papa John himself was supposed to be military. He was supposed to raise up to go into the military. As a child, he was being groomed for it, having attended elite military prep schools, culminating in an appointment to the prestigious U.S. Naval Academy at Annapolis. So this guy was destined for big things in the military, but instead, hippie. Now, Papa John's first wife, Susie Adams, was a direct descendant of John Adams, our second president of the United States. And Susie's father, James Adams Jr., was involved in military intelligence and cloak and dagger shit. Susie herself would later work at the Pentagon, alongside Papa John's sister, Rosie, who worked at the Pentagon for almost 30 years. It's even said that Papa John's mother worked in government in some unspecified capacity. And keep in mind, his mother, Edna, claimed to have psychic and telekinetic abilities. Maybe she worked in PSYOPs? So Papa John, one of the leading counterculture personalities, has deep ties to the government and the military complex, as does his wife, as do sisters in that family. It's crazy. Oh, and good old Papa John, from Mamas and the Papas, later in life, he had a supposedly huge, air quotes around supposedly, consensual sexual relationship with his daughter, Mackenzie Phillips. Look that one up for a good time. And this is great, Oscar. Brian, my friend who helped me with this episode, he wrote in the notes right here, I would still bang Mackenzie Phillips silly. That's pretty awesome. All right. Now, moving on to another member of the Mamas and the Papas, we have Mama Cass Elliot. Mama Cass, supposedly big hippie, peace, love, was a notorious drug dealer, and her house in Laurel Canyon was famous for its wild, oftentimes violent, drug-fueled sex parties. Mama Cass even had one of her ex-boyfriends tied to a tree and beaten and sodomized at one of her famous soirees. What the fuck, man? Mama Cass sang California Dreamin', one of my favorite songs. It's not right. Cass Elliot is rumored to have made a pornographic film of herself having a threesome with Warren Beatty and Yul Brynner.
My God, Yul Brynner.
Yeah. And Papa John and Mama Cass had a close relationship with the Manson family. Actually, Mama Cass and John Phillips, Papa John, were subpoenaed for the Charles Manson trial to speak on behalf of Manson. That's how close they were to Charles Manson. It never happened, though, as both Mama Cass and Papa Cass were called off the witness stand. Let's talk about James Taylor. Do you know James Taylor? Or, right? Didn't we sing this in one of the podcasts, Oscar?
Sounds familiar,
yeah. Famous James Taylor song, Fire and Rain, Carolina in My Mind, You've Got a Friend. I really like that song, You've Got a Friend. Now, James Taylor, he spent time at two different mental institutions. One was McLean Psychiatric Hospital, and the other Austin Riggs, both in Massachusetts, and both have definitive ties to MK Ultra. After getting out of the institutions, James Taylor sped off to Laurel Canyon. Now, Taylor's father, Isaac, James Taylor's father, Isaac, was the dean of the medical school at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Father Isaac descended from a wealthy Scottish family that goes all the way back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the founding of Sudbury, Massachusetts in 1638 or 39. Isaac Taylor was also, now this is nuts, Isaac Taylor was also part of what's called Operation Deep Freeze in Antarctica during 1955 and 56. Now here's a little bit about Deep Freeze. Before there was an Operation Deep Freeze, there was an Operation High Jump, headed by one Admiral Richard Byrd. The purpose of Operation High Jump was to explore and survey the Earth's poles. Long and short, according to legend, Byrd and his crew encountered hostile UFO craft in Antarctica that could travel, he said, from pole to pole at incredible speeds.
Whoa.
Military outposts were established to defend Antarctica, which still exists today. And Operation Deep Freeze was established to resupply those outposts. This is what James Taylor's father was involved in. Now, of course, in present time, Antarctica is a hotbed of UFO activity, UFO lore. We're talking underground alien bases, extraterrestrials, and alien aircraft are all supposedly hidden under the ice there. And there are numerous locations in Antarctica that are strictly off limits to the public, deemed classified, quote unquote, for scientific research.
Huh.
Now, let's talk about Stephen Stills and David Crosby of Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Famous songs for Crosby, Stills, and Nash. We're talking Sweet Judy Blue Eyes, which is a really good song, Our House, and my favorite, Chicago. Do you know the old songs like Our House, maybe, Oscar?
Yes.
Our House is a very... These are the people we're talking about, okay?
Yeah.
Now,
I know.
Stephen Stills was a founding member of actually two of Laurel Canyon's most beloved and acclaimed bands, Buffalo Springfield and, of course, Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Stills penned one of the most enduring theme songs of the 60s generation, the Buffalo Springfield hit For What It's Worth. I fucking love this song. There's something happening here, right?
Mm-hmm.
What
Yep.
it is ain't exactly clear. Okay. I don't know about you, but when that song's on, that's immediately what I think of when it comes to the 60s and the hippie movement. It's that song right there. Now, Stills followed up the song For What It's Worth with a popular single called Bluebird, which, incidentally, was the original code name for MK Ultra. If you read the lyrics to Bluebird, it's about forgotten things, lost love, a woman's sadness, and the color blue. The color blue is used in MK Ultra programming, and I don't know, maybe I'm reaching here, but was Stills trying to tell us something about the MK Ultra program? Now, Stephen Stills' father, William Stills, spent a lot of time in El Salvador and in Costa Rica, the Panama Canal Zone, and various other parts of Central America, seemingly as a mercenary, helping bring democracy to that region in that unique American way. Stephen Stills spent much of his childhood in those areas along with his father. As Stills grew, he, like so many of the Laurel Canyon crew, was educated at military academies. Later in life, Stephen Stills would brag to anyone who would listen that he fought in the Vietnam War and was involved in some shit, which most
Would
people
brag about it?
Yeah, he would brag about being in the Vietnam War and that he saw some shit, man, which a lot of people ignore as the rantings of a drugged up hippie, because Stills' appearance on the Laurel Canyon scene and his constant involvement in the scene happened as Vietnam kicked off. Stills was there in Laurel Canyon the whole time. But what others claim, and it's probably true, is that the United States had undercover operatives in Vietnam years before the war, in the form of CIA and Special Forces personnel. And it could be that Stills was actually telling the truth, having himself been one of those undercover operatives. Now, as far as David Crosby, his father was Major Floyd Delafield Crosby, a World War II military intelligence officer, who met another man, Captain Claude Andrew Phillips, the father of Papa John Phillips, during a U.S. military occupation in Haiti in 1927. Small world.
Yeah.
Now, David Crosby's real name was David Van Cortlandt Crosby, descendant of 3 interrelated families: the Van Cortlands, the Van Schulers, and the Van Rensselaers. Going back for almost a century, these 3 families wield a shit ton of power. We're talking senators, congressmen, judges, governors, mayors, Supreme Court justices, and Civil War generals. There's even a few high-ranking members of the Freemasons in David Crosby's lineage, and he is a direct descendant to Alexander Hamilton, one of our founding fathers. Safe to say, David Crosby is blue blood as fuck. And David Crosby, the hippie, right? Peace, love, man. He loved guns. It was rare if he wasn't packing. And Crosby himself said that he once fired his gun in anger at another human being. Yet he's seen as a star among the flower children, a real peace and love kind of guy. Then we have the Byrds. The song Mr. Tambourine Man and Turn, Turn, Turn. For everything, yeah, right? David Crosby also started the Byrds, so all of the familiar background applies to the Byrds too. Now, in the beginning, this is one of those bands that sucked. The Byrds couldn't even play their instruments. In the recording studio, they used a team of studio musicians, headed by none other than Phil Spector. And Spector and his crew of studio musicians were known as the Wrecking Crew. Of course, Phil Spector was convicted in 2008 of killing actress Lana Clarkson at his mansion. Actually, a bunch of famous Laurel Canyon bands used the Wrecking Crew in the studio. The Monkees, the Mamas and the Papas, the Beach Boys, and a lot of others.
Yeah, the Beach Boys for sure.
Yeah. Remember, these people couldn't play, yet they were signed and blew up and all became influential. Come on, man. Then we have America. Probably America's most famous song is A Horse with No Name, which I love. That and Sister Golden Hair. Maybe Tin Man and Ventura Highway, too. Fuck it, I love America. Now, all 3 original members of the band America, Jerry Beckley, Dan Peake, and Dewey Bunnell, all 3 of their fathers were deeply involved in the military. Beckley's father was the commander of the West Ruislip U.S. Air Force Base near London, and Bunnell and Peake's fathers were Air Force officers that worked under Beckley's father, which is how the 3 founding members of America first met. They were
like some sort of fucking play dates or something.
Yeah. They were all at or around this Ruislip Air Force Base over in London. Fucking small world. And they all wound up at Laurel Canyon just by chance? No way. All right. Now, which brings us, those are kind of the bands I wanted to touch on, famous, influential bands that most people have heard of. Now I want to talk about a little further Charles Manson and the Manson family murders. And as I mentioned, we're going to do an episode on Manson. I've been writing it, and it seems like forever. There's just so much, and I'm not sure what direction to take it. So I mentioned Manson with Terry Melcher, but let's take a closer look at what happened. Because this all happens in and around Laurel Canyon. In 1967, after getting out of Terminal Island, where he was doing time, Charles Manson tripped over to Berkeley, California, and the Bay Area, and hit the scene there for a while and gathered some followers. Manson and his family then took a magic bus down to Laurel Canyon, where they quickly became entrenched in the Laurel Canyon scene. Manson was the magic man, a soothsayer, someone who always had drugs and women around him, so he was immediately accepted by the Laurel Canyon crew. At one point, Manson even auditioned for Neil Young. That's how tied in he was. And of course, on August 8th and 9th, 1969, the horrendous Manson murders took place, where Stephen Parent, Sharon Tate, Jay Sebring, Wojtek Frykowski, and Abigail Folger were brutally murdered at 10050 Celio Drive in Benedict Canyon by Manson family members Charles Tex Watson, Susan Atkins, Linda Kasabian, and Patricia Krenwinkel. Those are the Manson family. lot of people don't realize that the victims of the Manson murders had really close ties to the Laurel Canyon crowd. For example, Abigail Folger and Wojciech Frykowski, they lived right across the street from a popular Laurel Canyon gathering spot. Jay Sebring owned a famous hair salon at the mouth of Laurel Canyon, and Papa John Phillips was an investor in Sebring's salon. Sharon Tate was known to regularly hang out at home of Papa John Phillips and Mama Cass Elliot. On the night of the Manson murders, Papa John Phillips and Denny Doherty, the other Papa and the Mamas and the Papas, they were supposed to be at the Tate's house. But something prevented them from visiting, and they wound up narrowly missing the slaughter. And Tex Watson lived in Laurel Canyon for a time and knew the crowd. It's crazy how intertwined the scene is and how much history-changing things and notorious events took place. Then we got the Wonderland murders. This was a movie with Val Kilmer, I believe.
What was it called? The same thing?
Could have been. I'm drawing a blank right now. It was actually really good. I can't remember. Anyway, two of the most famous murders ever in L.A. were the Manson murders and the Wonderland murders. Now, the Manson murders happened in Benedict Canyon, and in Laurel Canyon is where the Wonderland murders took place. They're only 6 miles apart from one another. Actually, the Wonderland murders took place on what's called Lookout Mountain, a road called Lookout Mountain Road, right in Laurel Canyon. Now, the victims in the infamous Wonderland murders, the Four on the Floor murders, as it's sometimes called, these victims, they dealt drugs to people in Laurel Canyon Circle. One of the members of the band Three Dog Night admitted to almost being there the night of the Wonderland murders to buy drugs. He could have been a victim. Okay. So I wanted to mention those two murders because they tie directly into the Laurel Canyon crew. Then we have something in Laurel Canyon called Lookout Mountain Laboratories. And this is fun. Now, history tells us that the Lookout Mountain facility was built in 1941 as an anti-aircraft air defense center designed to protect Los Angeles during World War II. After the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, people were terrified Japan would launch an attack on U.S. soil, specifically Los Angeles, and for a damn good reason. What a lot of people don't realize is that during the war, Japanese submarines were found off the coast of California, thousands and thousands of miles from their homeland. On Christmas Eve, 1941, a Japanese submarine called I-19 launched a torpedo at, but missed, the lumber schooner Barbara Olson as she made her way towards San Diego. On the same day, I-19 torpedoed and hit an American lumber freighter, the Absecora, in the Catalina Channel between Catalina Island and the California mainland. A gaping hole was ripped in the Absecora's hull, but she did not sink, and thankfully no one was killed. Later, in January 1942, a Japanese submarine called I-17 fired heavy artillery on a U.S. oil refinery in Elwood, California, near Santa Barbara. No one was hurt, and damage to the refinery was minimal, but the attack on U.S. soil by a Japanese sub happened nonetheless.
Yeah.
Then, in February 1942, in the wee hours of the morning, radar stations picked up an unidentified object flying 120 miles off the coast of California, just west of Los Angeles, and heading towards land. At 2:15 a.m. Pacific time, anti-aircraft batteries were put on green alert, ready to fire, and spotlights were ordered to start sweeping the skies. The unidentified object was tracked to within a few miles of the Los Angeles coast, where it seemingly vanished. Then at 2:21 a.m. Pacific, a blackout was ordered. LA went dark, but information centers were flooded with reports from citizens claiming to see enemy planes overhead. Soon after, planes were seen over Long Beach. Then about 25 planes were spotted over Los Angeles, and what was described as a balloon carrying a red flare was seen over Santa Monica. That's when 4 U.S. anti-aircraft batteries located in Santa Barbara and other coastal defense locations opened up, and 50 caliber machine gun fire lit up the night sky over Los Angeles. All totaled, the battle lasted for over 3 hours, and around 1,440 anti-aircraft rounds were fired at the mystery objects. Nothing was hit. Nothing was brought down. No enemy bombs dropped. No enemy airplanes shot down, even though thousands of civilian and military personnel claimed to see strange craft in the sky. Hell, had them in their spotlights.
What was the shape?
I'll get to that.
Oh?
Local homes and cars were damaged by falling artillery, and a few Los Angeles residents died from heart attacks and car accidents. But that was really it. So what the fuck happened? And at the end of World War II, Japan said, in fact, they didn't send planes over LA that morning in 1942, during what became known as the Battle of Los Angeles. The official story blames the entire incident on weather balloons and servicemen already on high alert with itchy trigger fingers. To this day, no one's really sure what happened that night. Now you could look this up. Photographs from that morning. One famous photo shows 12 spotlights lighting up a huge target a few hundred feet in the air, and it's definitely not a weather balloon. It's a huge disc-shaped object with a bunch of running lights all over it. I'll leave a link to that image in the episode show notes. You got to check it out. And getting back to Lookout Mountain, this is the kind of thing, this Battle of Los Angeles is what Lookout Mountain was designed to look for and prevent. And since Lookout Mountain coordinated Los Angeles radar stations, there's a good chance Lookout Mountain was involved to some degree in the Battle of Los Angeles. Cool, right? Now, later, Lookout Mountain turned into a CIA research and development house, as well as a film studio for the U.S. Air Force to process raw film stock from early bomb tests and nuclear bomb tests. Everything the studio needed to make a motion picture was in-house at Lookout Mountain. There was absolutely no need to go to a public motion picture studio. Now keep in mind, this place, Lookout Mountain, wasn't even acknowledged until the 1990s, even though estimates say that some 19,000 government propaganda movies were made at Lookout Mountain.
Really?
Yes, stars like Marilyn Monroe, Walt Disney, John Wayne, Ronald Reagan, Bing Crosby, and Jimmy Stewart all had passes to work at the Lookout Mountain Film Studio. And interestingly, none of these actors or actresses, not a one, ever spoke about what they did there. These megastars were needed to help with nuclear film tests? Fuck out of here, no way. Some even claim Lookout Mountain is where B-roll for the faked moon landing was filmed. And I'll leave a link to a cool period video about Lookout Mountain, the facility itself, in the episode show notes. It's really, really cool. Now, Laurel Canyon even had its own talent company called Lookout Management, formed by Elliot Rabinowitz and David Geffen. Lookout Management helped the careers of Neil Young, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Bob Dylan, the Eagles, Buffalo Springfield, and America, just to name a few of the bands. Now, I'm going to feel some conspiracy theory here, but Lookout Mountain was right smack in the middle of Laurel Canyon, which is where the hippie movement almost spontaneously spawned. There was a quote-unquote talent management company called Lookout Management, which helped build the careers of very influential bands of that time. And the rumors go way back before this hippie thing about the CIA and MK Ultra infiltrating the entertainment industry. Remember, again, MK Ultra was a real CIA program that ran all during the Laurel Canyon music scene and the hippie movement. Specifically, MK Ultra 1953 to 1973, and the Laurel Canyon hippie movement the early 1960s until the Vietnam War ended in 1975. And of course, the CIA and MK Ultra were supposedly deeply entrenched at Lookout Mountain. Now humor me here. Could some of the famous bands and actors and actresses we've been talking about, people that influenced how an entire generation thought and behaved, could those influencers, we'll call them, could they have been part of the MK Ultra program, either willingly or unwillingly? In other words, could they have been created And as a result, did the U.S. government create and define an entire generation according to their wills and needs? Sorry for that tangent. Now, a few more points about Lookout Mountain. It remained in operation until 1969. Then Lookout Mountain became community housing for a while. Then it turned into a celebrity rehab facility where for about $50,000 a month, stars could get clean. Then most recently in 2015, Jared Leto, 30 Seconds to Mars frontman, and the guy who played the Joker in Suicide Squad, he bought Lookout Mountain facility to a tune of a cool $5 million to use as a private residence.
Huh. I wonder if there's anything underneath or around that area, right?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to find information on it.
Yeah.
Really interesting, man. This shit is really interesting. And I'll tell you what, the death list, either by murder or supposed suicide or tragic, air quote, accidents of famous people living in Laurel Canyon and their associates outside Laurel Canyon is just fucking staggering. It's the list is a mile long. And then there's the cult activity and child pornography rings, all in Laurel Canyon. We could do a 3-part episode on this thing alone.
Yeah.
So the question is, were these Laurel Canyon people groomed? Was the whole hippie movement and the anti-war movement and the associated bands created? Were they created? Remember, hippies were not the inventors of the anti-war movement. The anti-war movement began on college campuses by clean-cut, conservative, educated, collegiate people, professors and their students, people that, for a lack of a better phrase, could be taken seriously by larger America. Suddenly, out of nowhere, the collegiate anti-war demonstrators, the believable ones, were replaced with the long-haired, bearded, freaky-dressing, free-sexting, LSD-taking, pot-smoking hippies. How does mainstream America take that seriously? Members of the original anti-war movement, these guys, they openly questioned to the media. They said, is this movement manufactured? And this is a quote, is this movement manufactured? Where the hell are all the hippies coming from? End quote. So the conspiracy is, the entire hippie anti-war movement was created by the U.S. government, namely the intelligence community, which all these Laurel Canyon people have in their histories, to put a much less convincing face onto and subvert the real anti-war movement, the well-dressed, well-educated anti-war movement, to discredit the real movement. Remember, war is fantastic for business. War brings in a shit ton of money for very powerful people. So think about this. If the hippies and the anti-war counterculture, this goes right back to your point at the top of the show, Oscar. If the hippies and the anti-war counterculture were really a thorn in the side of the government, two movements that had a big influence on public opinion, forces that were openly doing and selling drugs, banging underage girls, having sex wherever they pleased, all while changing the way a generation thought, why wasn't anyone ever arrested with more than a slap on the wrist? There were serious charges going on every single day, yet none of them were arrested without a slap on the wrist, with just a slap on the wrist. The draft at the time was in full swing, and most of these Laurel Canyon guys were draft age. Why weren't any of them ever drafted? It's almost like they were allowed to continue. I mean, just before all this, polite America hated Elvis Presley for his, quote, vulgarity, his animalism, end quote, and his seductive, swinging, yummy hips. Elvis was too much for America. The people we're talking about, they're Elvis on crack. Yet they were allowed to continue with little to no interference from law enforcement. It's curious. And it's hard to chalk this up to kids rebelling against mommy and daddy, because not a single one of them, no one, not one whose family was involved in intelligence or atomic weapons testing or high up in the Army or in the Air Force or in the Navy or dealt in chemical warfare or held government positions or had tons of money, none of these flower children, the ones outraged over the Vietnam War, the draft, the dark roads they thought America was heading down, Not one of them ever went on record saying, Daddy, I hate what you're doing. Daddy, what you're doing is wrong. I reject my family because of what they're involved in. Nothing like that did a single one of them ever utter. The end.
I see what you did there at the end. I would say, wait, is this really the end?
It's the end. I'm done.
Are we still recording?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, okay. I didn't know if that's what you wanted, like the ending of the actual show to be.
No way, dude. I want your opinion. I want you to talk.
Because you do that. You do that all the time.
You've been so polite and letting me go on and on. I want to hear from you, man.
Oh, okay, good. Yeah, okay.
Hey, should we take could we take a vape break without going to break? Just real quick.
Yeah, sure.
We both vape. Hey, vape. So what do you think? I really think there's something to this. I really do. It's all too coincidental. There's too much in the background of these people's family, the family background. Too much. That is not a coincidence.
I have a few comparisons for you.
Yes.
I saw a movie recently that I love so much that I've been rewatching. I've seen it 10 times, right? It's a movie from the 90s called JFK.
JFK, back into the left. Back into the left.
Right. I don't know what you think of that movie. I love it. It's a marvel of editing. Any future editors out there, that is your manual. Anyway, I don't know if you know this about it, but a lot of that stuff in that movie is pretty fake. But it's like a lot of it's lies, flat out lies that Oliver Stone did on purpose to elicit a response from the general public, right? He's manipulating the things and weaving conspiracies that aren't true to tell a story, right? Okay. I know that he's known to be very anti-establishment and anti-war. I mean, he was in Vietnam War. That's why he made Platoon, things like that. And the connection I'm seeing here is that some of the stuff in that thing relates very closely to what you're talking about, except that in his end, he fabricated something that very is conspiratorial that happened to be coincidental. And that is really the deaths of a lot of people that either were witnesses or knew the people that knew Harvey Oswald, for example, right? All of the mysterious deaths of all these people. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, what was the guy's name? Kevin Costner's character. I forget his name. It's gone.
2 a.m. I can't think. I should know this because I love the Kennedy conspiracy, but go ahead.
Oh, I love it too. It too. Even if it's wrong, I love it. Anyway, one of the things he does is that he starts the investigation 3 years after the murder, after that day, and then a lot of his investigation happens even a year or two after that. So, and a lot of those murders and things that people have disappeared or traveled off to is just people moving on or just dying from life happening. And not all of them. Some of them could be conspiratorial, could be shady, but not all of them. But the film shapes it to be, in order to support its conspiratorial tone, shapes it to be a big conspiracy, so that way he won't see the evidence, he won't find statements, he won't get eyewitnesses. So a lot of that, I think a lot of it can be applied to some of this. I think it is very much possible that these kids, these hippies, whatever, would exactly do that rebellion thing. I'm not saying to be a rebel on purpose. Some of them probably for sure were like that. Some of them do it very blatantly. But I think a lot of them just do it as a systemic, kid to parent thing. They just do it out of sheer subconscious will to rebel against their parents. And I think that a lot of them were probably just too afraid, let's say, to fucking say anything, or maybe we're told very explicitly not to. And maybe, I don't know. My point is that I don't know if it's all of them that could do that, but I think some of them for sure were told and probably knew to some extent that it maybe was somewhat fabricated. I think what it was is that they were pushed to it. It's like they weren't told do this, or they didn't say this was going to happen. They didn't know what kind of hair, what kind of tie-dye, what kind of anything. They didn't know any of that. I think what they knew is that they knew something would come from this, and they knew that probably what you just said earlier, that as a general tone, the public will not take them seriously. And that's the main thing. As long as they don't take them seriously, who cares how big it gets and how specific they're going to be? They probably just let them do it. Don't arrest them. Let them keep doing their hippie thing. Let them blow up.
So we can continue doing our thing in the background.
Right. I think, So I don't think they had any like big hand in the development of this shit. I just think they just let it happen. Wow. And I think the more extreme you find these kids, parental guidance, whatever, like the fact that they're all military crazy, Office of Operational, whatever you said, like, I think the more extreme you come from that, like a person who growing up in a cult is probably going to have a more extreme opposite viewpoint than is someone who just grew up in a regular Orthodox, right? And it's, so I think the fact that these guys became hippies is probably a very natural version of their extreme military background. It's like the more headstrong you are, the more the reaction to your kids will be based on that, right? People who get abused all the time react a lot more extremely, sometimes in the opposite end, sometimes in the very extreme violent end, but they react extremely. None of them react normally. Now, there are a few odd apples, of course, but like overall, that's the overallness of people's upbringing and how much upbringing relates to your life and your future and what you will become and what you will do and how you react to things. Usually, that's why a lot of people are boring as shit, because none of them come from this kind of thing anymore. And not many people are like that. And there are more millions out there that are more traditional, more like their upbringing is much more regular. It has to do with little moments than it is a big life change. So I think the fact that this movement brought on by a lot of especially World War II and Vietnam, it combined those two kind of mindsets. Their parents must have been, of course, extreme military people, of course. And of course that their kids will react this way.
I like that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. That seems to be the most fitting answer, but it's still what I like about my answer is that it takes a sum off the top, but it doesn't diminish the fact that I think you're right, though. I think they did allow it to be shaped this way, or maybe they just rounded off the corner. So you're like, here, you're gonna trust this hippie now? I like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
very believable.
Good. Well said. I love it. I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah, and it's also like it takes a lot of power away from the whole movement in a way, maybe not in a bad way. Like, I don't know. I just can't. I wish I was around back then, just so I can know the feel and like think about this now. What I'm saying? Like,
could you imagine running through Laurel Canyon naked, high as fuck?
Right, and reading that stuff, and you think of what is that? Have you seen that docuseries on Netflix called Wild Wild Country?
No.
No, you should check it out. It's pretty cool. It's not at all what you're talking about, but it is somewhat. It takes place around that time, a little after, I believe. And this small town I believe in Washington State. I'm not sure where. These Indian or Hindu-based religion grew up from there, like seemingly out of nowhere. They bought all this land. They basically made their own town there, and they're all wearing they would all wear red. They were very sex positive, like extra sex positive, and they did all this stuff. And at some point, when they had backlash from the normal people, quote unquote, right, the ranchers of the side, the State Department, things like that, when they were like hated by them and started getting resistance from them, they doubled down and they bought guns and they were like poisoning people and shit. That was like, it's like this big thing. And the docuseries is it's a little biased for sure, but it shows a lot of comprehensive viewpoints. It's almost like this entire thing rolled into one place, during one time frame. You can see a lot of similarities to what you were saying about the hippie movement and the mentality of how they attracted all these white people to go to this Hindu guy who was this religious guy to them. But was it a cult? Was it just a freedom of expression? To them, it's one or the other, and it's very interesting what was manipulated there and what wasn't.
Huh.
And yeah, it's kind of cool.
I can see how it could relate.
Yeah, definitely. Not 100%, but like some of the stuff totally rings true. And yeah, it was a fun series, very compelling.
Cool, I'll check it out. I got a lot to binge on Netflix.
Yes, you do.
Well,
what do you think? Have you thought of anything else, or like anything specific what appealed to you, number one, to make this a topic?
Well, I grew up on music like this thanks to my mom.
Yeah.
The Doors, obviously even though not Laurel Canyon, but the Beatles and Led Zeppelin and Pink Floyd, all this stuff. The Mamas and the Papas and
Yeah. Your mom was a hippie, right?
Right. She was a flower child. And
yeah, totally.
So I gravitate towards this music. Now that I'm older, when I was younger, I fucking hated it. But, now I can't get enough of it. I love it because it reminds me of my childhood and home and my mom. And it's just great.
It's nostalgic.
Nostalgic. It's good music, happy music, fun music. Even though a lot of it's protesting the war, you still get a good feel listening to it. And so that's what kind of drew me to it. And then Brian, who helped me put this together, Bubba Maney, I call him. Bubba told me about this topic, how all these, I think we were talking about music one time when I was on one of my road trips. I'll talk to him for like 5 hours when I'm on a road trip. And we started talking about conspiracy theories, as we often do, and started talking about music somehow. And he's like, well, did you hear the Laurel Canyon stuff? I'm like, oh, we were talking about Charles Manson. And that's what it was, because I was thinking about putting together a podcast on Charles Manson, and he knows quite a bit about it. And he's like, well, did you ever hear of Charles Manson's tie to Laurel Canyon? I'm like, what the fuck is Laurel Canyon? He's like, you don't know about Laurel Canyon? And it just kind of spinning off. And we talked forever about it. So I finally sat down over the past, I don't know, maybe month and a half and started researching this episode. And I was immediately drawn in. And to me, to have so many people with so many background similarities, these deep military ties and MK Ultra and intelligence and chemical warfare, and to have so many of these people congregate into such a small area in a place that wasn't known for music back in the day, to me right there is suspect. That is weird as fuck. That's like, me walking out of my front door and all of a sudden overnight you're next door and Minister Sal's across the street and Brian Bubba Maney, who helped with this episode, is on the other side of my house. It just doesn't, it's impossible to have. It'll never happen. To me, that's the same thing with Laurel Canyon. Frank Zappa walks out and, oh, there's Jim Morrison. There's the fucking guy from America. There's the guy from fucking Mamas and the Papas and the Byrds and the Monkees. And, oh, Charles Manson. Too much concentrated in one area.
Yeah, maybe it didn't even feel that way to them. Can you imagine? Like, they're just neighbors. They don't think about it that way. Right. It's amazing. Yeah.
But it's still the fact that that's a star, that's a star, that's a star. I should say that's a budding star, that's a budding star, that's a budding star, that's a budding star. Right. I'm a budding star. Too coincidental, man. So I really do think there's something here. Whether it was their parents training these kids from a very young age with MK Ultra tactics, I don't know. But it's too curious to be overlooked.
I have 2 questions before I forget that. I didn't write it down. I'm thinking of it now. One is, this is a big one. This might be weird. It might be an actual conversation. What do you think are okay, so maybe I should rephrase. So rewind. Okay.
Yep. Go.
Right. I was going to do the noise, but I didn't want to. Do you think if the government, or by the government I mean the institution that allowed this to happen, or let's say for the sake of it, they did do it on purpose, do you think they succeeded if it was done on purpose? Do you think they succeeded in what they tried to do?
Well, the Vietnam raged on regardless of what the hippies said.
Right.
They didn't take...
So for the sake of argument, would you say it did work? It did do the mission worked for them. It was a success.
I think it did, because if it was the collegiate, we'll call it, movement that grew to be such a massive force, if it was that crowd, I think change could have happened. But since it was the other group that grew to be so large and influential, America was like, get fucked, and the war was, and people were, I got to be careful how I say this, and maybe, I don't know how to say it without,
Well, just say it with a preface, like I don't mean this, but or whatever.
It's almost like America was for the war.
I mean,
probably enraged people right there, but I think
no, I don't think that's a wrong thing to say. Some people were, a lot of people were, probably,
right.
yeah.
More were because of the
No, you're right. You know how many people? Okay, the last great war before Vietnam was World War II, which has a lot of. We're experiencing, I think, a lot of the downwind, the downfall, and the cons of what we were able to successfully do in World War II. All the pros have gone and passed now, and that is the fact that we won. We stopped this horrible thing. Then we doubled down on communism, which led to a lot of problems. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Point is that I think the next great war was Vietnam, and I think you think of the mentality of coming from that high. It's like wanting the sequel to The Godfather, and expecting Godfather 2, but we really got Godfather 3 or some other worse or whatever. Think of another example. And I think we wanted the sequel to be the same or feel as important, and it wasn't. It was a trashy thing we did, and of course a lot of people were patriotic as fuck. Yeah, and of course,
you made me think of something. I want to strike my answer from the record.
Okay.
I want to strike my answer from the record.
Let me talk to our stenographer. Can you take it? Okay, good. She said okay.
Now, you asked me, do I think if it was a conspiracy, did the conspiracy work?
Mm-hmm.
If what the conspiracy was for is to get America behind the war, no, it failed. And here's why. With World War II, like you said, patriotism was at an all-time high. Those guys, God bless them, when they came home, there were parades in the streets, right?
They never had to pay a drink for the rest of their lives.
Right. People loved them. They were heroes. Veterans of the Vietnam War came home and they got spit on. They got shit on. So it seems like America wasn't behind the war. So in that fact, I would say that maybe that conspiracy failed. I don't know. That's tough. It's tough.
Well, the reason I ask is that was a preface to my actual question, which is, if they did succeed? Let's just go with they did it on purpose and they succeeded. What is the ramifications we're experiencing now? I think you think of serial killers. You think of violence in the news, or just one aspect. I'm sure people can think of many better examples that I'm thinking of right now. But I think of what California means to a lot of people. I think it changed so much because of this hippie movement. You think of what happened. I think it did a lot to desensitize a lot of people for the future generations. All this hippie stuff and the Manson murders. It wasn't a big deal. All this stuff that became huge problems and are still problems today. The way we look at, I don't know, crime, or the way we look at, I don't know. It just feels like it's public. It's like they made crime famous. Like all this, the Manson family coupled with the hippie stuff, like the fact that they were hippies, they were anti-war. And if you're like a regular person back then who was over the age of 18, you probably were like, well, these hippies don't know what they're talking about. We were supposed to support our government. And then they see something like the Manson thing happen, and then this, Roman Polanski and all these murders and all this chaos from them. They're like, oh, they relate to that. How much does that do for the public view? How much does that do damage for a lot of people thinking of their child growing up with any sort of, I don't know, rebellious bone in their body? You think of people who become metalheads a decade later, right? Yeah. And you think of, and you think of how that relates to Satanism and how it relates to the Memphis 3 and shit, and they didn't really do it. It's just because they look like they did it or something like that, I don't know. It feels like a big, giant, like a stepping stone to this, like, cynical, I don't know if I'm really saying it right, but it just feels like it's like a part of I think there were negative effects that they never foresaw coming.
Yeah, it's possible. And, for sure, in 1969 with the Manson murders, those, that said that killed America's innocence right there. That ended the Summer of Love. That killed the kind of the peace, love, hippie movement, and
Right.
America saw a new side of itself with
And you think of the murder, right? The murders of JFK and Robert Kennedy, right? Bobby Kennedy. How you said earlier that academic people were in charge of these anti-war stuff. They were doing this stuff. They were doing it smart. They were going to college and doing it. Right. They were being political and doing it. And they have two figures to them. Their Jim Morrison, their fucking Dennis Hoppers get killed in front of them for running and for public office for it. Their champions got killed. And how do you not get depressed from that? You know, it's like that was maybe strike one, and then strike two is the hippie movement. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like first you destroy the champions, then you discredit their movement by adding these hippies in there. This is assuming that they did it on purpose, of course.
Right.
But like,
no, I'm loving this. Yeah.
It's like a giant, like a step one, step two, like a phase one, right? And phase one is destroy the people, the higher ups, which is the president in this case, and then his brother. And then the step two is discredit them all and make people forget what they were running for. You know, make people like they were saying all this hippie stuff, just not with music and long hair. They were just doing it with shorter hair.
Yeah, shorter hair and suits.
Suits, right, and a lot of fucking, I'm sure, but still.
That's a really interesting point. I don't have the answers to all this, of course, but right. I wonder what the big picture was then. You know, take out the figurehead, then discredit the entire movement. What were they trying to do in the background? That's what I'm dying to know.
Right.
But we'll never know, you know.
Yeah, obviously. It's something we can't ever know. And even if people will tell us straight to our face, how do we believe them? How do we believe any of that? I mean, it's just, it's insane. It's fun to think about, but it's like, it would make sense because you can't, it's not just, you can't just cut off the head. Another one will grow back if you don't discredit its existence, you know?
Good point.
It's like the Komodo dragon or something, you know?
Great point.
I had another question earlier, but I forgot.
You sure?
I don't know. Maybe I'll jog. I don't know. It's gone.
Well, I hope the listeners like this episode. I put a lot of research into this along with Brian and.
I would say though, I think we're coming out of that stint. I think we're coming out of that fog a little bit because a lot more people are into, you know, the more cynical version of them. People are like, just, you know, do you behind closed doors, but don't bother me. That's a more cynical version of it.
That's
but
also,
I am.
Right,
I know that's the way you are, and in many ways that's how I am, but not 100%. But I also don't have a family like you do, so I don't have like a lot to lose.
Understood.
However, the more positive side of that, you see a lot of this in people I talk to here and there, or myself to an extent, is that a lot of people are like, you know, I may not be in your religion, I may not be in your viewpoint, I may not like your fashion sense, but that don't mean nothing because you are like, it's like a fellow man thing. It's like people are becoming more cool about what you're doing as long as you're not forcing it on others, right? And now we get extremism everywhere, of course. I'm not saying that. Sure. But I'm saying I think people are more relaxed about judging people even if they're wearing different things than you are or listening to things that are different than you are. My friends are all a compilation of people that watch completely different things, listen to completely different things, dress completely differently. You know, it's just much more okay with that. I don't think it was so much back then. Back then, it was really much more black and white about that kind of thing. At least it felt that way.
Like when they were ready to crucify Elvis for his swinging hips.
Right.
You know,
I mean, right. Back then, you can identify who you hated by their bell bottoms. You can't do that now. A guy wearing bell bottoms could be a pedophile or it could be the nicest guy on the planet. It doesn't. You have to meet him. You don't know that.
It's true. I mean, look at me. People see me walking down the street, they probably think I'm homeless, but you know, from 9 to 5, I'm wearing a nice suit and tie, you know?
I mean, I don't know about nice, but I'm kidding.
But no, it's true. You're right. Yeah. You're absolutely right.
You know, nowadays, it's not just I'm not saying education has no part in it. Of course, it has a big part. But it's not just education that people value when you talk to you. It's like other things, too. Like, what are you into? What do you think about this? You know, it's not just that. You know, people are more fascinated. They're asking more questions. things that they don't know. I don't know. I see it more often, maybe, and maybe it's not true. Maybe I'm just like seeing more positive things than I should be, but it feels that way, you know.
I mean, being optimistic, that's good. I think that's what we need today. More optimism.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and I hope that's the case. I hope we are coming out of this fog, generationally slow, but getting there maybe. And I know maybe we'll go back to the days that what our great grandfathers used to talk about, how the man's work is what should get you progress in life, not who you are, not where you came from, not how much money you have, but like right, or who you know. But yeah, I don't know.
No, it's good stuff, man.
Yeah.
Glad this made you think. That was awesome.
Oh, your topics always make me think. It's great. I never would have thought of this like this in a million years if we didn't talk about it.
Awesome. Very good. Yeah. Well, what do you say we bring it to a close?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do it. Let's see if we can edit the Skype call because I've never done this before.
Yeah, I'm nervous how it came out. I hope it comes out well.
Yeah, I hope my vaping wasn't too interruptive.
No. Listeners, love you guys. Support the show. Visit our Patreon. Hit us up on social media. Oscar, say good night.
Guten Nacht. I don't know. Guten Nacht. Nacht. How do you say that? Good night, bitches. Good night.
Good night.
Get out of here.
Good night. Oscar, take us home. Should we start and kind of get it just roll?
Fuck it, let's do it.
Fuck it. Okay, I love it. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2. Welcome to.
Wait, I'm supposed to give the countdown. I'm sorry. Just go ahead. Whatever you want.
Okay. All right, let me take a sip of water. Okay. Oh, and a vape.
Oh my god, do I sound that loud when I vape?
Yeah, I can hear when you're vaping.
Damn. Okay. I'll try to do something about that.
Okay. Okay, ready?
Yes.
5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, so now it's break time, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's still recording. This is fun.
So you want to? Sorry, what?
No. Say this is fun. This is pretty cool. I like this. Now it won't be, at least for you and I, it's not going to be so stressful all the time, where we could always kind of do something like this in a pinch.
Yeah, I also don't want to be lazy though, and like get used to this.
Okay, fair enough.
I know that it's. I know. I mean, maybe I shouldn't be so against that. I just don't want to like blink and it's been 6 months and we've only done it this way. You know?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? But yeah, so here, pay attention to see if you can hear this, how bad you hear the vaping right now. Hold on, I'm going to try something.
Okay. Oh yeah, no, it was loud and clear.
Damn it.
How about mine? Let me try this. Hold on. I'm going to try to... Where's the microphone? What if I did this? Dude, I literally had my fist over the microphone on my headset.
I did nothing. It just sounded like an angrier vape.
Oh my god. Okay, so I won't be vaping.
I'm sorry, I did it a few times. I just do it so compulsively. I don't even.
Oh, preaching to the choir, man.
It's so compulsive. I mean, I think people will forgive us, but yeah, it's not great. I will try not to.
Okay, but yours isn't. It's not horrible. It's not horrible, but you could. It sounds like you're dragging something, like across
Oh, really?
like
Like a
across
dead cat?
wood. Yeah, kind of like something across a wood floor is what it reminds me of.
I thought of that before. Taking a hit of a mod or a vape setting feels like dragging a cat through the woods.
That's awesome. That's a good commercial.
Yeah, they should focus on that. I've never seen a vape commercial in my life. I don't know if they exist.
I don't think so.
Holy shit! I thought you were balding. You're not balding. It looks good.
Yeah, did I send you the pictures when Katie put cornrows in it?
Yes, you did send me the cornrow pictures, and I posted it online everywhere I could think of. I believe it was on number 1 Reddit.
Why does this old white guy have
right
cornrows?
That's exactly right. A lot of people thought I was making some sort of political statement with it. And I was like, no, I'm just showing you, just embarrassing my friend here with this photograph.
We were drinking, listening to music. Katie's looking at my head. She's like, I bet you I could braid it. I'm like, there's no fucking way. I don't have that much hair. And sure enough.
Show enough. Yeah, say
show
like
enough. Right. I gotta say
it like Spike
enough.
Lee. You gotta say it like Spike Lee says it. Show enough.
Show enough, kid.
I never felt less minority than right now. Trying to say that correctly. So, first of all, hi. It's been a while, man. Jesus.
I know.
40 fucking pages.
Yeah, it came out to like 37 and a half.
Still, that's like 40. You round up.
Round up, yeah.
I round up at that point. 37 and a half. Okay. 40.
I'm so burnt. Oh my God.
You look burnt. You know, I thought I was burning myself, and I am, I guess, but not compared to you, man. That's a lot of work. That's cool.